came to the conclusion was social ills, long-term unemployment, the opioid epidemic, and justice impact. And then I started to understand that this, A, those are interrelated, but B, this justice impacted population is this incredibly overlooked population. And it's not that every one of them can be good employees. I think that's a really important distinction or a point to make. It's that it's the processes that you can use as an employer to find who's ready to be a good employee and then to give them the tools to thrive. But what I've come to understand, and I say it still has to be based on that. It's got to be a business proposition because, for example, we have 19 million Americans with felony convictions. How do you possibly scale up solutions unless it makes monetary sense to do so? And it won't solve for all of those 19 million, but it will solve for many, and that will start to turn the tide. Will also free up more resources. So the ones who need more resources, either to protect public safety or need more resources to become employable, will free up those resources. But what is increasingly clear to me is that it's not just about helping the individual, it's turning families around, turning around multi-generational poverty, turning around communities that have been underinvested, neglected, and aren't, frankly, in many cases, safe. And it has to start with recognizing that we have an intergenerational problem. One of the best predictors of whether someone will grow up and go to prison is if they had a parent who was incarcerated.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind Enemy Lines. I hope you're having a good evening. I'm very excited to have my friend Jeff Korzenik, who you just saw up there. He is the chief economist for Fifth Third Bank. He's the smartest friend I have, and he's also the author of Untapped Talent. As if you can see by the lead in there, Jeff wrote a book. He published a book about untapped labor market for ex-offenders, like myself. So many of my close friends, family members, work counterparts, know my background. Not everybody does. So the purpose of this show is to share a little bit about my background, but more importantly, listen to Jeff, who's an economist, and talks about the benefits of ex-offenders, not just on the economy, but on the taxpayers and on the families and the vicious cycle that occurs within some families when a parent becomes an ex-offender. So there's so many things, there's so many components that are tied into the benefits of hiring ex-offenders, and not every ex-offender is going to be the perfect hire, just like not every employee that you interview from the street that doesn't have a criminal background or might have a college education is not going to be the right hire. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. My partner, Paul Drabick, is going to be on the show next week, my co-host. This is going to be a conversation between me and Jeff and a little bit about my background as well as, the book. So everyone knows who watches the show regularly, Paul's my brain, so I got my cheat sheets here for me to keep on track here, because Paul usually does that for the show as I chime in here. So I wanted to give you a little context about my background for those of you, many of you who are watching that don't know. I was raised in the Southwest Side Italian-American family. Grew up in a house that was 725 square foot. For those of you from hometown Illinois that know our little duplexes that we grew up there. It was a really nice little neighborhood. And in my early 20s, I was a weightlifter, serious weightlifter, and I went to a gym in the Southwest Side of Chicago. And it's kind of where I ran into new people that I never hung around with, including some older Italian brother family guys that I met at the gym, and they reached out to me to start hanging out with them. I was a doorman at Bally's Tomfooleries. It was a bar, Bally's bar. And so I started hanging out with these guys, and they kind of recruited me. And I went along. It's something I chose to do on my own. And these guys were transitioning from working in the South Side, mob connections from chop shops. They were doing chop shops. This is in the mid to early 80s. And then if you're old enough to remember how the big, influx of drugs occurred in the 80s, and they were transitioning from chop shops to drug sales. Chop shops is very labor intensive. So I'll have to ask Jeff later, the economist. It's very labor intensive, and it's got a big overhead, and, with body shops and junkyards and everything. So these guys transitioned to a higher profit margin in the drug trade, and I got recruited into their organization, and eventually got in trouble and was incarcerated. Again, this was 35 years ago. I've changed my life dramatically. I mean, 35 years, after I was released. So it's not like I just changed myself in the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It's been 35 years. And I did learn my lesson the hard way. So that's a little bit about my background. We'll talk about some of the crazy and maybe more exciting details about what happened on the Southwest side in a different show. I'm going to have John Kappas. He's probably watching. John Kappas is another author. He wrote the book called Tall Money, and it's about some of the things that John and I and others did in the Southwest side. It's going to be a book pretty soon, and John was part of my crew, and so we're going to talk about that in a few weeks. And let me see, what else am I forgetting? Oh, yeah. So anyway, so part of my transition, what I did is I worked in the film business for a while. So I was a electrician in a grip union. I was also in Screen Actors Guild. I'm still in Screen Actors Guild. And I, at the back end, when I started, when the movie business started slowing up in Chicago, before I got into high-tech sales, I got my SAG card. I believe it or not, I played gangsters in about 6 different movies. And then the movie business dried up in Chicago because of our unions and other differences. And I actually got into high-tech sales. So I worked for some of the biggest consulting firms in the world, over the last 25 some years. My microphone thinks, okay, sorry. So I don't get it too close because sometimes my big Italian nose hits it and it, scares everyone. So anyway, I transitioned into high-tech sales. Got my degree at 37 years old. And for those of you who are not familiar with high-tech, it's a big deal, especially growing up from hometown, let alone the baggage I had. And so I was very fortunate, and I had to prove myself. And I worked my way up to bigger and bigger companies. And I had that baggage that I carried along with me to this day, and that's part of what we're going to talk about with Jeff, and some of the things that he is familiar as an economist, and the benefits of hiring folks like myself. So, I guess I talked so quick. That was 9 minutes.
Yeah,
we're gonna
the IFA commercial too.
Okay, we're gonna do the little IFA commercial,
And then we'll bring him.
60-second commercial, and then my buddy Jeff is gonna join. Hello, Jeff. Welcome to the show. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks so much, Terry.
Yeah, so I know you're busy. You travel all over the place, so I appreciate you squeezing me into your schedule. I know we were talking about this for a while, so I appreciate it to have someone like yourself on the show, and all the work that you do, because you have your full-time job as a chief economist, and you also fly all over the country and do all these other things for, second chance hires and Untapped Talent and all the people that you speak to. So I really appreciate, to have you on the show here. So Jeff Korzenik is the chief economist of Fifth Third Bank. It's a big deal. And he is the author of Untapped Talent. We're going to talk about that today. But so Jeff, you'll obviously do a better introduction of who you are and your background. And then after we do that, before we jump into the book, I just want to show some of our guests, some slides that talks about the metrics and things about, ex-offenders and how, give them an understanding of a little bit about what's going on in the country.
Sure. Well, I got to start out with my standard disclaimer when I'm talking about criminal justice reform and what's called second chance hiring, the intentional employing of people with criminal records. I'm here representing myself, not my employer. I'm an author. I'm a researcher on this topic, among other topics, and just happy to be here with my friend Terry.
Thank you. You know what, Jeff? Thank you for saying that. Just so you know, this is Terry Newsome. I'm here representing myself, not my employer. And see, I told you the guy's smartest guy I know. So, so I just want to get that. So hey, Jason, show a couple. We got like 4 slides. We just want to set some context for people that are watching.
What's the Televerde one?
That we don't need that one now. Televerde. I had threw Televerde in there, Jeff.
That's nice.
All right. So this talks about the rise of mass incarceration. If you guys saw the spike, and then I think a lot of that, I think most people know is attributed to the war on drugs, right?
Absolutely. And that's a big distinguishing factor. We have more drug addiction to things like opioids than any other developed country on a per capita basis. It's sadly a big part of the fabric of American life.
Well, I really didn't look at it that thoroughly until now. Like it looks like it dipped down a little bit there. See, on the top of the graph. Do you know why that occurred?
Yeah, I mean, we started incarcerating somewhat fewer. At some point, you've maxed out your incarceration, but it's also age related. So most people go to prison when they're quite young, and people age out of crime, and so our population's starting to get older. And I think some of this is changes in incarceration related practices in the judicial system. Some of it is probably just aging the population and fewer younger people to keep pushing into the system, and some of the older ones started coming home.
Oh, so I know exactly what that is, and I'm going to translate that. Baby boomers like me got old, and the recidivism, and I know this from the things I've done in the past with ex offenders, and I didn't even mention to speak to inmates when they got out. I worked at the Bureau of Prison, Department of Justice. I brought back jobs, like Jeff. I think you know that when I brought back some jobs to the federal prison system. But the recidivism rate, that's the rate of returning to prison, drops dramatically as people get older. Right. So the baby boomers, just like everything else, is whoop. And then all of a sudden we're starting to get old. So they're wising up. There's, and now, hopefully the next generation will be a little wiser. Plus, there's I think a pullback on the war on drugs. Right. Not that it's trying to get rid of drugs.
We can condemn something without making it a pathway to prison.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's. And I think there's this realization that at some point incarceration wasn't the answer to making our society safer, because we had such a high recidivism rate of people getting out of prison who ended up back in prison. And I got to, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's important in the context that those who've been in prison is only part of the picture. Yeah. I think of that intro video. I referenced 19 million Americans have felony convictions. It's very telling that of those 19 million, fewer than half were convicted of a crime of such threat to public safety that they even had to serve a prison term. So we were handing out felonies like candy at one point, and it becomes this terrible mark on people's records for something that might not in reality have been very serious.
Yeah, and I remember, during the war on drugs, with you get caught with like 5 grams of crack, you get 5 years in federal prison, right? Which is absurd. I'm not saying go soft on crime, but it's got to, it just was a big disparity, and it didn't make sense. And a lot of people were put in prison for a long time for their first time in trouble for a low amount of drugs. So I'm not
and that's changed. The majority of people who are in prisons are in for crimes of violence, but you don't even know what that means necessarily. There's one of the trends that's out there that's been so destructive is this concept of overcharging or plea bargaining. 95% of cases never go to trial. They are pled away, and prosecutors, there's an a criminologist at Fordham Law School, John Pfaff, has kind of documented how prosecutors had career incentives to try to turn everything into a felony conviction for their career advancement. And so you'd get someone arrested for whatever, put in jail for pretrial detention, and would be offered a deal, plead guilty to the felony, and you can go home. And you tell that to an 18-year-old or 20-year-old or someone with wife and kids at home, you'll do whatever you can to go home, and then you're stuck with a felony conviction on your record for life.
Yeah, you know what? That really. I'm glad you brought that up. That's like a forced coercion in some cases, right? And I'm not going to get into all my details of the story because I want to talk about you and everything. But when I do that in a few weeks with John, I was kept for 3 days. Long story, right? In a lockup, and it's 3 long days when you're not used to, you know what I mean? And they do that to people on purpose. They really do. So go back. What happened to that slide up, Jason? You're getting me dizzy. Yeah, there we go. So 100 million Americans have criminal records. Just to speak to what Jeff said, I think you said there was 18 million with felonies, right?
Yeah, so 19 million with felony convictions.
Yeah, so this 100 million criminal records can be misdemeanors. And is there anything you want to add to this? I mean, it's a third of our population.
Misdemeanors is a great book out there by Alexandra Nadapoff, and it's sort of it's punishment without crime, and it's basically how the misdemeanor system is totally broken as well. And I'm not I don't consider myself necessarily a justice reform person. I'm all about employment and economics, but if employers, and I think the general population, truly understood how stupid our criminal justice system is, and we wouldn't stand for it. It doesn't make, it clearly hasn't made us safer.
Yeah.
It isn't necessarily, just. I don't want to delegitimize the system. There are lots of good people trying to do the right thing in the criminal justice system, and by and large, I think they do a lot of. There is certainly some societal good. There are justifications for imprisoning people. There are justifications for all sorts of penalties. But we have this haphazard system that is just not particularly good at delivering justice or public safety.
Yeah. And we'll go back to the graph, Jason. Sorry, mate. The one you just had up, the chart you just switched from, the 100 million folks, right? So if you look at that number, right, 100 million Americans have criminal records. So, we have, 300 and some million folks in our population, Jeff? 300, what?
Yeah, about 330. And
yeah.
So like 1 in 3 people has something, it might be pretty minor. It might not be something that's an issue. Some of this is basically people who are in a criminal database, and it's taken, I'm going to put on my analyst hat, get a real geeky here, but, some of this is taken from state databases that might include traffic violations. But, I think it's safe to say 19 million with felony convictions, tens of millions more with misdemeanors. And even if we don't know the exact number, that's a ton of people. And it's a ton of people to be effectively holding back from full participation in society.
Yeah, what I was leading to with this graph, why I went back there is, the 100 million. So, like, how, we talk about 330 million in our population, but like this, how many are of working age, right? That this, big, so it's even that number is even greater. If you look at the population that's able to work and be employed, it's more than, it's more than a third. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to reference that. You want to go to the next one, Jason? Okay, barriers to employment. With 87% of employers conducting background checks, a criminal record can be a major barrier to employment. And that I learned that myself going through my journey, I guess. And again, we'll talk about that next time. It's too long. I get too much crazy stuff to talk about here. I think things, and you could talk to it better than me, but I think things have been changing a lot, right? With ex-offenders and trying to give people a fair chance. You can't, like in Illinois, they no longer have to check the box and things of that such, right? That is making it a little bit easier, correct?
I'm going to argue that the best thing that's happened is a labor shortage. And, that's helped a lot of people like in the trades get higher pay and it's also helped employers come to judging people, being much more open to people who they might have overlooked in the past.
Yeah.
It's really easy when we had an abundance of labor 20 years ago. You had almost too many applicants. I was in Dallas, and the CEO of a tech company told me that for every opening, she used to get 400 applicants.
Mm-hmm.
Now she gets one.
Wow.
When you have 400 applicants, your job is excluding the people to look at.
Yeah.
So, let's only require people with bachelor's degrees, even if they can do the job. Let's take out anyone who had a 6-month gap of employment. Well, that might have been someone raising kids or taking care of an aging parent. I mean, to blanket exclude people was what we did because of the volume of application, the surplus of labor we had. Now that we are in a shortage of labor, employers are much more willing to say, well, let's really look at this applicant as an individual. If there's a criminal record or if there's an absence from the workforce, let's be willing to find out what happened. So to me, that's been much more impactful than any policy, including Ban the Box, which has had some very, kind of mixed reviews in terms of actually changing anything.
How was it executed? Okay, I think we have one more left, right, Jason? Oh, there we go. Okay. As many Americans have criminal records as college diplomas. That's really interesting, isn't it?
It speaks to the massive waste of human capital we have.
Yeah, I guess I'm a member of the club. I have both.
Yeah. You're a twofer.
Right? That's it, right, Jason? I think. Okay, let's get Jeff back on and get into his book and some of the things that he has to share with us about second chance hires and the positive impact on the business community. So go ahead. The floor is yours, Jeff.
So the core message of my book and my work is this labor shortage not only isn't going away, it's actually going to get worse. And this is economists aren't very good at predictions. This is one I'm standing by because it's pretty easy. You go back and you look at birth rates back 20 and 30 years ago, and then you look at the number of people, the baby boomers who are retiring. And when those baby boomers retire, they're still consumers. They still need people to deliver goods and services to them. And what all this stew means is that the percentage of our population who are even of the age to be in a workforce is going to be shrinking relative to the overall population. And that's going to keep going for at least another decade, and means this labor shortage where every employer is complaining about unfilled openings is only going to get worse. And the message of my book is that the single most overlooked and largest pool of talent is the population of people with criminal records who get overlooked, and that employers have to consider this pool or are wise to consider this pool, and that fortunately there's a process or a couple processes that you can use to pick who's ready to turn their life around and be a good employee, and then give them the tools to thrive. And my whole work is based not on some kind of abstract theoretical model. I went around the country and collected the stories of employers who figured this out. And for whatever reason, they couldn't find labor, or maybe they had a religious conviction or a family member who was justice impacted. They started figuring out, here's a talent pool. How do I tap it? And by trial and error, they learned that you can get not just another employee, but you can get exceptionally motivated and loyal workers if you do it the right way. And as I started my research, I would visit a manufacturer in Georgia, and they'd say, hey, here's how you have to do it. And then I'd go to a restaurant in San Francisco, and they'd say, hey, here's how you have to do it. And then, a tech repair company in Akron, Ohio, and they tell me how to do it. And it was always the same process. So I said, well, here's a model, and I better share that model. And that's the heart of the book is showing people why you have to do this or why you should do this, and how to do it in a way that makes makes the most sense from a business perspective. And that's really, I think, where I kind of separated myself from some of the what's broadly thought of as criminal justice reform community. I see myself as just as much representing employers as I do representing people with criminal records.
Yeah, I have an interesting story that ties into that about this dedicated good workforce that you just mentioned, right? And I think I shared when we first met about what I did with Unicore, Federal Prison Industries, right?
Yes,
With the data
yes.
entry. So here's an interesting story. I connected and reached out to the Federal Bureau of Prison. They're under Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prison. Within the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they have what's called Federal Prison Industries, called Unicore. So they make everything from, in some cases, the cable on aircraft carriers to helmets. They do data entry, scanning, digitizing, all for the federal government, with some exceptions for contractors. So in the late 90s, I reached out to the head of the Federal Bureau of Prison, and I said, we should be going after some of these jobs that are being sent offshore. They were really starting to go offshore at that point in time, right? And repatriate them and use that to transition some of these inmates into like high-tech jobs. And data entry is not a high-tech job, but it's the beginning part in getting them on computers, right? And using what they did for the U.S. Patent Service. So I started working with them, and I got a customer that brought back jobs from Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka, data entry for a big Chicago customer here. But as I was like reaching out to these corporations to try to get them the opportunity to consider this labor, because Congress changed the law to say that you don't want to get people in the United States to lose their jobs by inmates, right? Political disaster. But they said you have the opportunity to repatriate jobs or stop jobs from being sent offshore at that time. So I talked to executives from General Motors, HP, and a couple of them would say, well, geez, why would I want to hire, inmate, when I could get, because they do call centers, sorry. I could get degreed people. And I said, listen, sir, I don't know about you, but I didn't go to college to answer a phone, right? I said, the people that are in these prisons, these are the best of the best. Again, it's not, it's not like general population, but these people, they are so dedicated to changing their lives, and they're working in federal prison industries. And there's many different ways. Those that want to change their reasons, those that want to change their lives, but also those jobs pay more in federal prison industries. So you could either cut grass, clean toilets, work in the kitchen or the chow hall, right? Or if you work within the federal prison industries, you get paid more money. And I know this, to people on the street, 50 cents an hour is nothing compared to 21. It's a big deal. And so they're the higher paying jobs. Those are also the jobs that are a connection to their commissary and gives them the opportunity to buy phone time. And it's a connection to the outside world. So they're driven by that. These people, if they don't perform well, or if they even get in trouble within the prison, which is part of tying them into the willingness to transform their themselves, right, into being regular good citizens. So these people are the most sought after, and the turnover is almost nothing unless they're getting released from prison. So I told them that, and some of the guys are like, that makes sense, because who the heck goes to college to sit and answer a phone, especially back then, and in the late 90s, and it made sense. And actually, I did have HP, General Motors, Electromotives willing to, and this is kind of funny, willing to do a site visit of the facility in Texas where we were doing the data entry, and they had some call center capabilities. And I got a call from Washington, D.C. You want to talk about hypocrisy? So being an ex-offender is colorblind. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, right? They equally would discriminate. It's not as bad now, but back then it was pretty bad. And so I'm taking these executives to do a walkthrough to show off the facility, right? Because it looks like a facility on the street. They got cubicles, it's pretty cool. It's a great chance to escape from the prison life for the inmates. And so I get a call from Washington, D.C. saying, oh, Terry, can you have your customers or potential clients get their Social Security numbers? We've got to do background checks on all of them. I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right. What are you looking for? And he goes, oh, we just want to make sure they don't have outstanding warrants. So you didn't ask for mine. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. I sent it back to him. And then he calls back. He goes, oh, Terry, we need yours too. I said, oh, was this just for outstanding warrants? He goes, yeah. So I get a call from someone further up the chain in the Bureau of Prisons in D.C. saying I couldn't go on the visit with the potential clients that I found for them. And I said, why? They go, well, you've been in trouble. And I'm like, okay, well, you can't get inside the prison. I go, wow, that's a first. and, and I'm like, okay, well, why can't I get in the prison? The warden doesn't want you in there, and you should have told us. I got introduced to them through Catherine Hawk. She was the head of Federal Bureau of Prisons, and I shared my vision with her. She thought it was a great idea. I was invited by the Brookings Institute to Washington. I didn't even know what that was back then. I thought I was a prison. I was going to visit. I was invited to Brookings Institute to a prison industry forum. I sat next to Catherine Hawk, and then some top executive, CCC from Correctional Corporations of America, and Janet Reno was speaking. It was like, it felt weird for me.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, you should have told us in the beginning. And I said, well, look at what you're doing to me right now, right? After I was working with them for a couple of years, you guys said I was the most passionate, because they're all government workers, and I was able to talk to the business community, all the skills I acquired from business and my past, right? And I said, you guys are discriminating. Yeah, I'm out there selling these people. I'm trying to give people another chance, and my own government, the ones I'm working with. She was, well, yeah, you should have told. I go, look you're hanging the phone up on me now. What am I going to do? Call Catherine Hawk? Oh, by the way, I'm ex-offender. She would have never called me back, never talked to me. We wouldn't be here. So it's ironic. Being an ex-offender is colorblind, and people have that baggage for the rest of their lives, even if it's 35 years later, which is why I'm coming out on this. You can't give up. You got to keep fighting. You got people like Jeff in your corner and many, many others now. And you have to keep trying, because if you don't, you get stuck in a vicious cycle, and it affects your children. It affects so many in your family. It affects the community. It affects taxpayers. It affects the police. The stuff that you're doing is great. Sorry for my soapbox.
No, and I should share with your listeners. I focus mostly on post prison, or people who are not behind bars. It's a that's the world I understand, and so it's
like Televerde, right?
Yeah, or places that do have work release programs, or people come out of prison for the day to work, and there, I think some people have some qualms about prison wages. Even though I understand the argument that it's better than nothing, and the economics of placing a job in prison don't always support, even minimum wage. But the models that I've always focused on are sort of livable wage kind of opportunities outside of prison, or employers. If for instance, you're having something made in work release or in prison, and it's being shipped across state lines, state prison, you usually have to pay prevailing wages. And so it's a little bit different models. I don't condemn the other models, because it's always better than nothing, and particularly things that give skills to people and experience that they can use when they come home. But that's my focus.
So let me
when people are back.
Let me help dig out the little political hole I could have maybe dug for. So Jeff does not support prison labor, right? I was just sharing my story, and So I understand, especially as an economist, right? He does not support that. Is not going to displace. He doesn't support displacing American jobs with cheap inmate labor. That's a political landmine. He does not support that. Just to be very clear. Now, there's one circumstance where we have a common relationship with Televerde, and again, what I like about them is, and I think they're starting the women get more money. So it's a help desk call center, an outbound center, where they started out in Arizona. And they're training women inside prison to make outbound calls for big companies, tech companies like SAP and Microsoft, to actually make phone calls and become salespeople within the prison. But the next step, what they do is when they get out of prison, they employ them. I was at their headquarters, and it's super, super impressive. The women are
and not just entry level. They've moved up in the management ranks. The president of their foundation started in one of their prison programs, and no, there's nothing is sort of morally simplistic about a job in prison. There's lots of benefits to that. And particularly when the kind of models that I think work best are ones like Televerity, where they pay fair wages inside
Yes.
prisons and
Yeah.
then give the opportunities outside.
Yeah.
But there's so many people need to be able to earn, and so that when they come out of prison, they have a stake. There's this thing called gate money. When you are released from prison, you're given some money. I think it's changed recently, but for decades, the highest in the United States was California state prisons, where you got $200 and a bus ticket.
Yeah. I think
How far can you go on that?
Yeah, and the support family and all this other stuff. God, oh my God, we could go into that forever.
Yeah.
But like, some of the things that you wouldn't be aware of that, I talk from experience again here is if you work in a prison industry environment, right, doing something productive, you have a little bit. You're in a situation where you have a little low self-esteem. You feel, you have a little bit of a self-esteem, and then you get like 8 hours of escape from the prison. You know what I mean? It's like you walk into you get your mind is a little bit at ease. The people that are there are trying to better themselves, right? They want to better themselves, and not in the general. When you go back at night or whatever, and you're in a mix of people, and depending on where you're at, you're with murderers, rapists, all kinds of crazy things. But in even those cases, though, you could be with somebody working side by side with them.
Yeah.
And they are there for a reason, and they want to stay there, and they want to better themselves. And though, and that's what I would tell when I was soliciting. These are the cream of the crop, right? These people are really trying hard, and they're trying inside the institution. So those are benefits that you only would understand if you were in that environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the way I try to translate it for employers is if you think, each of us, whether we've had any interaction with the criminal justice system or not, have had moments in our life where we've fallen down and been less than the people we want, less than the person we want to be. And people of character, and that includes lots of people with a criminal justice background, people of character pick themselves up and redouble their efforts to prove to themselves, to their families, to their God, that they are more than their worst mistakes.
Yes.
And that's the heart of why this can work so well for employers, is because, you got to make some investments in doing things differently. You have to think a little bit differently, but think about getting people who are intent on proving that they're going to be good citizens, good contributors to their family, good contributors to your enterprise. That's a pretty powerful incentive that can create some really dedicated employees.
Yeah, because I think you said this before, is that those people, and not everyone's a good candidate, right? Just like the regular job market, it might be a little less in this in this population. But once you take the time and follow some of the things that Jeff and others know how to follow, recruit, train, hire, and take down some of those other barriers, and you get the right person, you have a dedicated, passionate person, just like Televerity. All those women that are out in the street, they're like, it's like a big family, right? And they're like, they got another chance at life, and they remember that. They're passionate, they're excited, they appreciate it. And those are the things that are important to employer, because it reduces the turnover, right, of having to hire and recruit, no matter who it is, a person on the street or an ex-offender. So that's super, super important. It's a big piece.
I'm going to put on my boring economist hat for a minute. And here's the equation. You have someone who cares deeply about their job and is loyal, right, is appreciative of the opportunity and wants to stick with you. Someone who cares about their job and stays in place, gets better and better at their job. They tend to be really productive employees, and productive employees are profitable employees. And to your point, you have low turnover, often a fraction of industry averages for the companies that do this. And so that drops the turnover savings, drops right to the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think it was in your book, or if I saw you speaking or something, where you talk about people like myself or others that overcome all these different obstacles, right, to get on the right path and stay successful. And that's something that people like myself have inherently, that's driven motivation to be successful. You said that in your book or in an interview, I think.
Well, and I'll tell you, when I first started this as meeting employers, I kept hearing the same descriptive word about people with records that they'd hired. And they all used the term grit. People with records that they hired have grit. And you think about how quick our world changes, all these jobs and data that didn't exist 20 years ago. And, there's a million, and I don't mean figurative, I mean, there's a million jobs that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago that are out here today. So what you need are people who are adaptable. And you think about how people who have been through the meat grinder of the criminal justice system, maybe deserved. I think in most cases, there's some element of people earned that mark. But it should also be.
I deserved it. I deserved it.
Yeah, right.
I'm not proud of who I. So just to be clear, I'm not proud of who I was. I'm proud of who I am. I deserved it. I made the decisions that put me where I was, and I screwed up. I deserved it. I got punished. I did what I was supposed to do, but that doesn't mean I should have that anchor to the day I die, even 35 years later, and it affect my children, my family, and everybody else. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I absolutely right. So I'm, if to the degree I'm part of the criminal justice reform community, I'm on the law and order side. You need public order, you need safe neighborhoods, but let's give people a chance to rebuild after they've faced the consequences of their mistakes. And obviously those consequences should be proportionate to the mistake and, all sorts of things. But I will say that when you understand all the barriers that people coming home face, or even if they weren't in prison, but have a felony conviction, and all the things that they have to go through to right their life, those who have done it are like just totally stand-up people. Mm-hmm. It was funny. I hired for my house. I hired a guy who runs an HVAC company, at residential, and he's got a successful business. And he was about to leave the house after doing a great job. And we signed a long-term maintenance contract with him, and things like that. And he sees my book, and we're talking about it. And he's about to leave, and he pauses on my doorstep, and he says, "I've never told a customer this, but I have a felony conviction." And it was way back when. It was for possession of pot, a bag of pot. Must have been a big bag of pot, to a felony, but it was a bag of pot. And he said, I'm in Florida. He pointed to his truck. "Look at me now." And he said, "I'm a husband. I'm a father of two girls. I own a business that employs others." He said, "I'm a good guy." And he said, "And until the last election, I was never able to vote because felons were barred from voting for many decades in Florida."
That's one of the good things I like about Illinois. I get the vote.
Well, look, we want people to be full citizens. That includes voting.
Yeah.
I can understand why, there are people who differ with me, but I understand why voting can be one of those things you take away during imprisonment. You can even understand why maybe during probation or parole, it's, this is you're not fully a citizen, but once you've done your time, you're a citizen.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, and especially if you look at the stats on recidivism and as you age. So, like, the longer you're out, the more you've proven yourself, as well as you aging, and the stats are, I don't know what they are. If you say, like, someone like myself, 35 years ago, ex-offender, compared to someone else my age, like, what's the likelihood of someone that was never incarcerated to someone that was getting incarcerated?
It's not, it's kind of this. I mean, there are a couple of, kind of mental health related things that seem to be, repeat oriented, or people who struggle with addiction their whole life. Addiction tends to lead to criminal activity. But for the vast majority of people, the longer you're out, the more your chance of having a criminal record just looks like the general population, adjusting for income and things like that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, too, with respect to me, I keep going back. I've never had any addictions, whatever. Some great, some of the story you're saying. I'm like, I was never a drug addict. My only addiction was making money, which is wrong, but I was never, ever, ever a drug addict. And I know I've seen people that, got caught up in the criminal system that went in as drug addicts, right? And then they come out and they get disappointed. It's hard to get a job. They feel defeated, and then
Yeah.
they fall back into it. Just like, people that are never in the criminal system but are alcoholics, and then something
Yeah.
affects their lives and they go back to drinking. There's always an excuse. That stuff, if you have that type of problem, is only magnified when you get out of prison, because you
Yeah, that's
carry
right.
so much more baggage that it's so easy to screw up and go back. So
Yep.
I just want to and then one other thing too is that, like myself and my other friends I'm like huge supporter of the police, more than some of my people that were never
Yeah.
even in trouble. I got my other friends, Dennis McGleese, Rick Sutton, they're all out. John Kapp is 12, 15, 17 years in prison. All like we have events with our cop buddies, all like we go to police events.
Yeah.
Right. And all of us know that what we did was wrong. Right. Well, and we deserve it. We're not like making excuses up. I explained how I got to when I kicked off the show. I explained how I got to where I was and the decisions I made to get there. But it's not like, oh, poor me. I was
Yeah,
wrong.
you owned it.
I got recruited. I didn't stop it. And I said, okay, but I was explaining the story of how I got to where I was from, not being part of that community.
So I'll tell you something interesting that started happening as it kind of goes both ways. The law enforcement community is also very supportive of this work. And so you have people like John Ponder, who runs a nonprofit called Hope for Prisoners, offers like 18 months of post-release coaching and training. I think something like 30 or 40% of their volunteer coaches are in law enforcement. They're trying to help this on a voluntary basis. But as my work started to come out, I'd start getting like phone calls and emails saying, hey, I'm in law enforcement. It might surprise you to know that I'm really supportive of this. And I'm like, no, you're my third call this week from law enforcement. I had an FBI agent. I met up with him when he was on vacation in Florida because he's been supportive of this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times, the people who are close to this issue, like the police, understand that that they've got a job to do, and it's a hard job to do, but that a lot of the people that they are interacting with aren't criminal masterminds, they're dumb kids.
Yeah.
And so they've been very supportive, and also they understand, and this is not the reason an employer should hire someone with a record, but the understanding is that this is also the best path to public safety.
Yes, it is. I totally agree with that statement. And some of these kids, to your point, get caught up. They don't have fathers. There's so many things that affect it, and they don't have the right mentors. And a lot of it's, I'm the last person. I'm not a bleeding heart liberal by any means, right? But I understand and it's what some of these kids go through and how it is, without having a fatherless home, right? And their neighborhoods, their community, they're being recruited. Well, I could only imagine if I was recruited at 11 instead of my early 20s. You know what I mean? And I might have made that choice at that age probably easier than I did in my early 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of this and a lot of crimes and violence are all tied to gang activity. And if, particularly young men and boys who don't have a father at home, there's a lot of allure to the gang. You feel a sense of belonging, love,
Pride,
protected. And it's the world so many of us kind of take for granted that think our own world is all there is, but it's there are communities that operate so differently, and you get to points where some communities have been so impacted by the criminal justice system that it becomes this intergenerational problem. These are the facts, and 1 in 3 Black men in America has a felony conviction. Like the rest of the broader felony convicted population, only about half were convicted of crimes that resulted in a prison sentence. But that's such an intense penetration that it almost normalizes it, and it really creates a lot of intergenerational problems when a young man doesn't get to see his father because his father's in prison, or even if his father never went to prison, has great difficulty getting a good paying job because of that mistake. And you just perpetuate this problem. Yeah. So I know, like in Chicagoland, where you are and where I've a lot of ties, there's a big effort to focus on hiring what are called opportunity youth. And that's great. But you also have to hire their fathers, and mothers too. I mean, but I think so much of this is a male-dominated problem. Obviously, I never a lot of overlooked opportunities with the female prison population, the female justice-impacted population. But 90% of the people in state prisons are men, and if you're not hiring the fathers, what are the sons seeing?
Yeah.
And okay, you can give them a $15 an hour job, but I'm not sure that is enough to keep away the lure of gang life. Whereas if their fathers are gainfully employed and can lead their children, I'm kind of a family traditionalist, and that to me seems the more productive strategy for addressing some of the intergenerational poverty and violence problems in cities like Chicago.
Yeah. So when I was inside, I can't tell you how many times I was with brothers, or even sons and fathers, or brothers in a different prison, dads in a different prison.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're together, and then sometimes, like in the minority communities, it's like a badge of honor going to prison. It really is. And then again, we're not going to talk about it now because I could take up the whole time. I was a Latin king. I believe, Italians. I became a Latin king when I was in prison as well.
I found out something new about you, Terry.
Lincoln Craig, and I became an enforcer for and so I got again. I was not part of a gang. It was just the environment I was in. Somebody called me a name in the day room, and I responded accordingly. So I was supposed to. And so the Latin Kings liked me. They brought me in, and I was like a big goon in there. But I got it's like I could tell from experience, right? It's like a family. It's their family. They take care of each other inside. So like, say if Jeff comes from one prison to this prison, or Jeff comes, he just gets incarcerated, he comes to the prison, he doesn't have his commissary, he doesn't have his he doesn't have stuff, right? They have a lockbox. Everybody contributes to the lockbox every month. You get your own commissary, and then one guy manages the lockbox, right? And then you contribute to it, and then when somebody new, and it moves around from person to person, and they make it like a family. Someone screws up, they call them. If someone makes you look bad, they get punished. You know what I mean? Like it's like a, and I saw that firsthand. So you could only imagine with young kids on the street, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, we have a deep desire as human beings to belong, and to belong to families. And if you don't have healthy family structures, people are going to be drawn to unhealthy family structures.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy. And I wish I could see easy ways to address it from the get-go. And, there are things we can do. But what I know works is if you give people who have messed up for those who are ready, I'm not universal, but those who are ready and have proved they're ready in the ways to do this, giving those people the opportunity to be good employees and good husbands and good fathers and spouses in general.
Those
good
children,
things.
Those children, right? The inmates, and especially moms, right? Those children need to see their parents outside of prison, right? And if the only time they see their parents is they're living with a grandmother, and they go see them at the visiting room in the prison, it's so sanitized. It's
the other thing that goes on is hopelessness is a big problem in prison. One of the things that I know you saw in my book, I when I first started writing about this, I published in like financial magazines and things like that. And I started getting letters from prison. And I guarantee you, I'm like the only chief economist of a bank who gets like correspondence from prison on a reasonable basis. And I got a letter that really stuck with me from a federal prison in Colorado. And this gentleman said, your article.
Was that Florence, Colorado?
I don't even remember.
Okay,
this was back in 2018. So, I had first published an article in Barron's Financial Magazine, circulation like 400,000, like a third of their readers are C-suite executives. It's a great magazine. And he wrote to me that the article hangs on their prison, on the wall in their prison library. And he said, it gives all of us guys in here hope. Thank you. So that stuck with me, and other, letters I started to get. And I realized, and I actually had to go to, I didn't understand the gratitude and appreciation. And so I went to a couple of my formerly incarcerated friends and I said, what's up with this? And they kind of filled me in on the sense of hopelessness. And I'm not going to solve that.
Yeah.
But
right.
I thought it was worth letting people inside know that there are employers who value them. And so there's a forward to my book. And again, I think it's the only economics book with a forward that's dedicated, or it's called A Note to the Currently Incarcerated. And it's a short, like 2-page thing, but it was important to me, and basically said, I know you think you're a burden to yourself, to your family, to your community, to your country. You're actually not. You're a resource.
Yeah.
And we have a labor shortage coming. We're going to need you. Use your time well, but you're not a burden. You're a resource. And then I was fortunate to connect with a philanthropist who wanted to be part of, just helping in general with the effort. Said, what would be great if we could send 500 books into prison libraries around the country. And I donated then 100 books. And we got them all placed through a neat
great
nonprofit called Books Inside that had connections to prison libraries. And it's since others have purchased more books to go inside. And it's not, look, it's a book targeting CEOs, but on the other hand, it tells people that there are employers out there who value people despite mistakes of the past. And I've had some great, some great interactions in Kewanee, Illinois. There's a Rotary Community Corps. It's like a Rotary Club. It's part of the Rotary organization that's in prison. And all the guys in there read my book. I was a guest, at one of their meetings. These are really meaningful interactions with fellow human beings. And I hope if prisons are more places of hope and less places of despair, I think we'll have a safer communities, and people can rebuild their lives more easily.
Yeah, what you just mentioned about giving people, one of the reasons I'm coming out, right? We've been talking about this for a while, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
What I call it, my concrete closet. You know how the other people come out of their closet? It's a concrete closet. And it's time, because I want to give people hope. And, it's becoming mainstream with ex-offenders. And, a lot of what you talk about is manufacturing jobs and maybe union jobs and stuff. But I want people to know that they don't have to just settle for that. So, yes, they're grateful. Some people don't have the tool set or the capacity to go, further up the food chain, just like anybody else off the street, though, right?
That's right.
It's no different, right? But I want people to know that they have a chance, that they can't give up. They got to keep, I would go speak at the Safer Foundation. It's been a long time. And I go in there, it's all.
Yeah, for your listeners, that's a reentry organization that helps people transition from prison into the real world.
Yeah, it's work. It's a work release kind of facility, I guess. And I would go. And it's all African Americans, and I go there. This is in my. Back then we had to wear suits. I know you as an economist probably wear a suit all the time, but so I go down there. I'm in a suit, and I'm like, I take off my tie, and and I'm like, oh my God, here's the white guy from the suburbs, So I would talk to them about my past, and the things I've done in detail, so I could relate to them. Yeah. Not brag about it, but because you don't want to walk in, hey, do this, this, and this. And they're like, okay, white guy, get the hell out of here. I'm serious,
No, I've seen it, and I've seen that there. I'm not going to say it's a brotherhood exactly, but there's that commonality of lived experience, and it's also important. My friend Glenn Martin often says, he's got this great phrase: "Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution." I'm paraphrasing him, but often farthest from the resources.
Yeah.
And so people who have that lived experience, I partner all the time with people who have a lived experience, and I learn from them, and I hope they learn from me. But it really, there's a level of experience and knowledge that comes from having lived it that's really important to finding these solutions.
Yeah, the message I try to come across with these guys right after I try to level set and say I'm like one of them is I go, okay, guys, for those of you who are drug dealers, right, or in here for selling drugs, and again, the whole population is, if you're out there selling drugs, right, it's like a business, right, Mr. Economist? It's like a business. It's just illegal. It's wrong. It's like a business, except you have more complexities and more dangers. You got accounts receivable, distribution,
Oh yeah, and you're out there protecting your inventory.
You got everything, right? You got like the profits. I mean, it's all street thug type language, you know what I mean? But if you translate it, it's like running a business. I said with the exception. So if you could be successful in that, and obviously you're not that successful because you're sitting here in prison, But
right. Your risk management, your risk mitigation wasn't the best, right? And
I'm guilty here too. But I say if you could do that, right? You could work in the business environment because if you are able, and this talks about coming over those hurdles and obstacles, right? If you could do that, wow, all the complexities of running a business, get shot, murdered, arrested, snitched on by friends, all those things, you got another layer that you have to do to try to be successful. And you take that away and you apply what you've done on the streets to a business, you'd be very successful, and you apply that same passion. No, you don't make as much money, but you know what? These shortcuts in life are not shortcuts. They turn out to be long cuts, right?
And you most end up not making good money because something happens. But I'll also say, because I'm sure there's some of your viewers, listeners who are out there saying, no, I tried this once and it was terrible. And you really have to understand that not everyone's going to be ready, and how you have to make some accommodations that sometimes have nothing to do with criminal justice, just poverty.
Mm-hmm.
But so all the good things we're saying about this process are assuming you do this the right way. You have a way and it's absolutely doable, for finding who's ready, who's owned their past and is ready to move on. And then you have to realize, someone might be coming out who doesn't have reliable transportation, who's got to meet up with a parole officer every other week and pay for that privilege, by the way, supervision fees, right? And, that's a really rough, and while they're trying to reclaim their driver's license, which might have expired, and get a place to live where there are restrictions. So there's a lot of hurdles that people coming out, or even people who've never been incarcerated but carry a felony conviction on their record, and some misdemeanors too. These are just things that employers need to know about. The employers don't have to solve these problems, but they have to say, okay, tell me when you need to meet with your parole officer, or tell me if you're restricted from going out of state, and we'll work around it. Doesn't mean you're giving up free time. Okay, you've got flex hours every other Friday to meet with your parole officer, but you still have to put it in an 8-hour day. And that's fine. But you have to know that. Yeah,
this is only doing this is only successful if the employer understands and embraces. So I read it in your book. I forgot which corporation it is. The guy doesn't have HR people; he has social workers, right? So, because
that's Nehemiah Manufacturing.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, right? So there's so many hurdles. So first of all, you got to make sure it fits for your business, right? These type of resources, and if they're unskilled or partially skilled, and then you have a very good labor pool access to it, but you have to do some of these other enablers, right? And the benefits will pay off with the loyalty, the lack of, the lack of turnover, and all those other benefits, right? Will overcome the quote social worker fees, or extra HR person, whatever you want to call the person, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even extra. It's just we make accommodations or have hiring processes for traditional employers that we don't even think about. You wouldn't go and, if you're an engineering firm looking for engineers, you probably wouldn't go recruit at a liberal arts school, right? A small liberal arts college. You go to an engineering school. You go to, University of Illinois, great engineering. So just like that, if you're looking for workers to be good workers, you have to have some kind of strategy in place. And there are lots, it doesn't have to be hard. It usually involves partnering with nonprofit that can make a real assessment and say this person is ready and will help with the coaching and maybe help with other issues that person is facing. And in Chicago, for instance, there's a great nonprofit called CARA, and they're spreading nationwide through their CARA Plus program. They wrap their arms around this person. They don't consider it a victory just to get someone placed in a job. They consider it a victory when that person is staying in a job and is thriving in a job, and they work to make sure that happens. That's the kind of partnerships that make for success. Like any other talent pipeline, you make investments to find talent. The difference in this talent pool is you have all these nonprofit and government partners who will help you. And help subsidize the cost of this. So it's a very savvy business strategy for the businesses that are willing to take this step.
Sometimes you get tax incentives to help with that as well, correct?
Yeah, right. Their work opportunity tax credit, their training grants. Should never do it for that alone, right? If you're just looking for a cheap employee, right?
Yeah.
But who else, can you hire that gets all these subsidies? For wages and training. That's great.
Yeah, one of the things I would tell these guys when I spoke to them is like, listen, guys, it's unfortunate the circumstances we've got ourselves into here, regardless of why we're here.
Yep.
That means for the rest of your life, if you're working at McDonald's and you're on the French fries, you got to be the best French fry maker in the restaurant, right?
Yeah.
If you're driving a forklift, no matter if you're in a white collar or whatever, you got to, it's unfortunate that we're going to have this baggage for the rest of our lives. And that's what society did, even though, they call it Department of Corrections. They need to change it and call it the Department of Punishment. It's not a Department of Corrections. There's some things that they say, on these little programs, but in general, and I'm not saying we shouldn't get punished. So don't, people who are watching, I'm not saying that, right? Yeah. But there's benefits of trying to do some things within the system that will help benefit society, employers, families, taxpayers who's got to pay for everybody to be locked up. And I when I pivoted from the movie industry into my first high tech job, I went to a recruiter at a small company. And I had a strategy. I planned to work my way up. I'm like, I'm not going to work as McDonald's, and I'm not going back. And then I interviewed at a company called ACI. It was a mid-tier 5-state IT staffing, transitioning into projects. And the woman who interviewed me for a sales job, I remember her name, and she actually eventually left to become a partner at Price Waterhouse, right? So so I'm in there with my Sears suit on. And I'm with this other guy in the lobby. He's all polished. He drove a BMW convertible there. I'm like, holy shit, we're going in and out in the interviews and stuff. And then so she's interviewing me. She's, I just don't think you have enough experience to be successful. I said, listen, I promise you, I will be more aggressive than anybody you have here. Anybody. You just teach me what I need to know. And I promise you I'll do better than anyone there. So I got hired. The other guy got hired. They hired two of us. And then we went to Microsoft training, right? For the whole day. And then so we're going, and I'm like, I meet the guy there, and he's like, hey, I'm leaving after signing. I'm like, why? He goes, oh, screw this. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is the Miss Polish, Ivy League looking guy. And I'm all excited to get this training and stuff, right? So that guy didn't last 6 months. I went on to do him, I was one of the top sales reps with a year and a half. And then I went up to CSC, and I'm interviewing with them. I didn't know what a supply chain was, Jeff. And I'm like, back then you didn't have the internet. I had to buy, I get trade rate. I'm like, what the hell's a supply chain? And I got hired into CSC, and 2.5 years later, I'm on the stage with the president of CSC. I got an award of top 10 sales reps in the country. Not CSC did big outsourcing jobs. I don't know if you remember from the, not
way
because,
back then.
Yeah, not because of the revenue, but he's reading off all the accounts that I opened up. I never met this guy in person. He was like a big executive at Lockheed, and we acquired them. And he's like, I love this guy, Terry. And they're playing the song Barracuda. And I opened up all these different accounts. And I remember when I was at CSC, and I had this Purdue master's degree guy, engineer, computer scientist. He was in the back. We had offices back, late 90s. And he comes in, he could hear, he's got to do cold calling, right? And he comes in, he's always really serious, and he's like, holy cow, Newsome. He goes, you're not scared to call anybody.
Yeah.
I could hear you. It's like, holy cow. I'm sitting there thinking, you want to talk about being scared, buddy? Let me
Yeah,
tell you
exactly
what I
right.
was like. I said, what are you scared about? I go, the worst thing they're going to do is hang up on you or swear at you. And that'll never happen, or they don't answer, or they don't say, don't call me again. Or they say, call Joe Blow, or come on in, I'll meet you. That's all you look at that. That's the worst things that are going to happen. So you guys, I'm thinking to myself, you're way smarter than me. And then remember with the .com, when .com started blowing up?
Yeah.
And we were like, we were big .com leaders, believe it or not then. And then that same president called me. He's like, Terry, you're the best hunter, we have in the company. Could you tell me what to do? Because everyone's getting desperate, right?
Sure.
And I was thinking of this guy, the Purdue guy next to me, and I said, listen, I go, you got so many smart people working here. I would tell they were partners. I was a principal. I said, tell every partner to pick up the phone and call at least 3 friends a week that are in the business, right? They got to be like Nike. They just got to do it. They just got to pick up the phone. That didn't solve the .com problem, that was a different issue. Right. But it's like, it's like you just pick up the phone and do it. And these are some of the things. It's a different kind of courage that applies in some of the things that I'm doing now outside of work, right? And some of the things that you're familiar with, as well as in work, and well as calling and picking up the phone and, going into situations I'm not comfortable. I'm like, heck, I'll,
no one's going to shoot you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to prison.
Right. Right.
So how bad can it be? Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Another friend of mine, Daniel Dart, is a venture capitalist. He's raised his first fund, multi-million-dollar fund, going to be super successful. And he was recently interviewed by a venture capital magazine, and he said, people said, you're courageous. He said, look, I'm not gonna get killed. What is there to fear?
Yeah.
I mean, he said, I've been in a life where the thing you feared was being killed.
Yeah.
And so this is nothing to, call up a wealthy investor and make a pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have any closing statements that you'd like to make? And then, I have one thing, before you make your statement and jump off, I've been waiting for this day for years with you, and I'm so happy. And I know you're introducing me to some of your buddies, the guy from MIT and other folks. And I hope we can do this on a broader event and try to give people hope and courage, not just the people that are affected, but these employers, and come and beat on my chest and say, yeah, I played with the big boys and I'm better than them. Honestly, I mean, I ran circles around guys that did what they're supposed to, and again, it all depends on the person. So do you have anything you'd like to close with?
It's funny. I just I can do my business pitch, but I think people get that labor shortage coming. It's going to get worse. You can't overlook talent wherever it can be found, and there's a model that works. But I also, I guess, what's on my mind is people like you are always kind of appreciative of the work I do and all that. But what's been great for me is all these new people who are now part of my life, friends like you and Daniel and others. When I look at my circle of friends, first of all, how lucky am I, in my 60s to be making really good new friends in life. Right. And the people who've kind of been through hell and back because of their criminal justice involvement are some of the most stand-up people in my life. So I'm really the grateful one for being introduced to you and some of my other new friends through this process and journey. So thank you.
No, I really appreciate everything you do. Our relationship. I liked you the first time we met for lunch, and I'm glad about the success of your book. I hope there's another one. Oh, one other thing. Sorry, I want to mention this week. Turning Point TPUSA Turning Point Academy announced me as the Educational Warrior of the Week. Thanks, Hudsenberg. He's the CEO of that organization, and they know about my redemption. I think he mentioned it, and my transformation. And I offered up. I'll go start talking to people through his organization, as well as anyone else that's watching us. And I think that, Jeff. I'm ready to come out and do whatever I can to help people, to inspire them to keep up fighting and never give up. And we're people too. So I appreciate everything you've done.
Anyway, great conversation as always with you, Terry. Look forward to next time we can get together in person.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Cool. That was great. I love that guy. super smart guy. For someone like a chief economist, he's got a personality too. You know what I mean? He's like, you could talk to him, right? So there's so many great attributes he has, and spending so much time and effort going out and spending time to go talk to people, to share his story about the benefits. And he's sincere about it. He's not doing it just because he's an economist and like, hey, this is better for you guys. He's doing it because he really feels that it's doing good for everybody, not just for the business community. So, Jason, you want to what were we going to show? Oh, we're going to show my next guy.
What about this story, Terry?
Wait, oh yeah. So, my friend John Kappas. We'll show his book next. He's going to be on in a few weeks. John Kappas has a book called Tall Money. He's from the Southwest Side, and that interview that I'm going to do with John won't be as serious as this one. It's going to talk about the trials and the things that we did in the Southwest. So John Kappas was part of my crew on the Southwest Side. And, I was recruited by these older Italian guys and then, got involved in that. And John, unfortunately, got involved with me. And for John, he got actually, he's never been arrested in his life. And this poor guy got caught in this big drug ring as well. And there's all these different circumstances that tied into his. I went down first, thank God, because the federal things came up afterwards. John got 45 years in prison as a 25-year-old. Didn't get caught with an ounce of drugs. Nothing, no drugs. It was a 24-person RICO conspiracy, and he got hammered. He got sentenced the same time Noriega got sentenced. They both got about the same sentence. And one of the circumstances, there's many of them, but 2 Chicago police officers' sons in Mount Greenwood committed suicide. That's awful. And they used their father's police revolvers. And I think part of this, because of all the media attention that happened around this with John, and these police officers obviously were devastated about their sons, and they blamed John. I guess they owed somebody money that worked under John, right? And the kids were scared. And that's probably true. But I even sent Royko, I think he wrote an article about it, and I responded to him when I was locked up and said, listen, it's awful that these kids committed suicide, but I'll tell you right now, they didn't commit suicide because of John Kappas or because they owed John money and they were worried about him. These children not children, teenagers, but they committed suicide because they're so scared of their own fathers that they didn't want to go to their fathers and say, help me. They were like 19, 18 years old, something like that. And if I had my son was a police officer, right, and say if he got caught up with some punk drug dealer, I would pray to God. First of all, I would hope my son would never be caught, and he wouldn't. My son's an engineering honor student. They got mom's brains. I would hope that he wouldn't be involved in it. But if something like that happened, and especially if I'm a police officer, I would hope my son would come up to me and say, Dad, listen, I got in big trouble, man. I screwed up. Would you please help me? I believe in my heart that those kids ended up killing themselves because they were more frightened of their fathers than they were of John Kappas, right? It doesn't make the circumstances any better. So that turned into this big political mess, and John got 45 years. Fortunate enough, he was able to appeal the sentence and got it down to 17 years. So John got out of prison after 17 years, changed his life. He works in, he actually had his own hot dog stand, a big one, Johnny's Weenie Wagon. His dad, he's Greek, so what do you expect from a Greek, right? He's going to go in a restaurant. And then he also worked in finance and for auto dealerships, and he's killing it, right? He's a natural-born salesman like most of us in that crew. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to, did you put up John's book?
I had it up for a good bit. Yeah.
Okay, and then what was that other one? Your helicopter one? Well,
we had that.
Yeah. So you want to show it real quick? No. So the producer Jason actually he pulled this up. That's John's. John's book. Yeah. The other one. And when we talk about John and our story, Julie Craig, his girlfriend, actually married Dan Hampton. For those of you who don't know, and this here from Goodfellas, you remember that with 2 helicopters. So when we talk about my story, I had 2 helicopters, not 1. And we'll talk about it. I'm lucky I'm alive. I'm lucky I changed my life. I'm lucky in so many different ways and reasons. It's hard to explain. So I'm excited, and hopefully I can help people, see hope and never give up. No matter if it's a career fighting for our children. Most of you people are watching right now. Part of the courage that I acquired was from doing this crazy stuff back in the day. So I'm not scared to confront anybody. Doesn't matter which side of the fence you are, what you're doing. If you're trying to hurt our children and our country, I'm not scared of fighting you after everything I've been through. And I think people know that. So thank you very much. Paul will be back next week. I think we'll talk about the library, and look forward to seeing you guys.